The October sun bathed the elegant streets of Chicago with golden light that contrasted with the coldness about to settle in the heart of one of the world's most famous families. Dolores Jordan, the 82-year-old matriarch, delicately adjusted the silk scarf around her neck before pushing through the glass door of Tiffany & Co. on Michigan Avenue. Her steps were firm, but carried the weight of decades of experience. Dolores wasn't just Michael Jordan's mother. She was a woman who had built her own identity long before her son became a global icon. Educated in teaching, she had dedicated years of her life shaping young minds, always believing that respect and dignity were fundamental pillars of society. On this specific day, she had a delicate mission. In her brown leather purse, carefully stored in a navy blue velvet box, was the wedding ring that Michael had given to Juanita Vanoy in 1989. After their tumultuous divorce in 2006, the ring had remained with Juanita for years, but recently, in a gesture few could understand, she had decided to return it to Dolores. "This belongs to the Jordan family," Juanita had said during a private meeting at Dolores's apartment. "And you were always more of a mother to me than a mother-in-law." Now, Dolores faced the dilemma of deciding the fate of that small piece of white gold set with diamonds that represented both love and disillusionment. The jewelry store was moderately busy for a weekday. Young couples admired engagement rings while executives examined expensive watches. The environment exuded quiet luxury: crystal chandeliers, immaculate display cases, and the soft sound of discreet conversations. Dolores walked to the main counter, where a young employee, approximately 25 years old, was organizing pearl necklaces. The woman had perfectly straightened blonde hair, impeccable French manicured nails, and a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her nameplate identified: Ashley Thompson, Senior Consultant. "Ashley Thompson. Good afternoon," said Dolores with the natural courtesy of someone raised in the South. "I would like an appraisal of this piece, please." Ashley looked up, making a quick visual assessment of the client. She saw a black, elderly woman, elegantly dressed, but without the obvious signs of extreme wealth she usually identified in Tiffany customers. No ostentatious designer purse, no flashy jewelry, just the quiet dignity of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "Of course," Ashley replied with a slightly condescending tone. "Let's take a look at what you brought." Dolores carefully removed the velvet box and opened it, revealing the ring. Even under the store's artificial light, the diamonds captured and reflected every ray of light, creating small rainbows on the surrounding walls. Ashley took the piece and examined it with a magnifying glass, her lips curving into an expression that mixed surprise and suspicion. It was undeniably a piece of exceptional quality: 18-karat white gold, VVS, 1 clarity diamonds, perfect cut. The type of ring that would easily cost more than $50,000. "It's an interesting piece," murmured Ashley, still examining. "Where did you get this?" The question came loaded with a subtle insinuation. But Dolores, with decades of experience dealing with prejudice disguised as politeness, immediately caught the subtext. "It was a family gift," she replied calmly. Ashley smiled patronizingly, putting the ring back on the counter. "Well, ma'am, this is indeed a quality piece. But I need to be honest with you." She made a dramatic pause, as if about to reveal some uncomfortable truth. "Pieces of this level have quite a rigorous appraisal process. We need to verify provenance, purchase documentation, authenticity certificates." Dolores maintained her serene expression, but something in her eyes hardened slightly. "And," continued Ashley, raising her tone as if speaking to a child, "frankly, considering the value of this piece, I need to ask." She looked directly into Dolores's eyes with an expression that mixed disdain and false concern. "Do you have a way to prove you can afford our services? Because our appraisal fee for pieces in this category is $500, and our clients usually—" The sentence remained suspended in the air like a toxic cloud. Ashley hadn't finished, but the meaning was crystal clear. "A woman like you doesn't belong here." Dolores took a deep breath, feeling the same tightness in her chest she had experienced decades ago when facing segregation in the South. When she had to fight for her children's right to attend good schools. When she saw her son rejected from the high school basketball team only to later become the greatest player of all time. "Young lady," said Dolores with a low but firm voice, "I believe there's a misunderstanding here." Ashley crossed her arms, assuming a defensive posture. "There's no misunderstanding, ma'am. It's store policy to verify clients' financial capacity before proceeding with high-value appraisals. It's for both parties' protection." At this moment, other employees began paying attention to the interaction. Two consultants stopped their activities, and a nervous-looking manager approached discreetly, sensing something was wrong. Dolores looked around, noticing the curious glances, and made a decision that would change the course of everything that happened next. "Very well," she said, taking the ring and putting it back in her purse. "I believe this isn't the appropriate jewelry store for my needs." Ashley smiled with satisfaction, as if she had just rid the store of a potential problem. "I'm sure you'll find a place more suitable to your budget. There are several more accessible options in the mall." The words were spoken with such condescension that even the other employees felt uncomfortable. The manager stepped forward, trying to control the situation, but Dolores was already heading toward the door. "Have a good day," said Ashley loudly, ensuring her victory was witnessed by everyone. Dolores stopped at the door and turned slowly. For a moment, her eyes met Ashley's, and the young woman felt an involuntary shiver. There was something in that look, a strength, an unshakable dignity that violently contrasted with the humiliation she had just suffered. "Young lady," said Dolores, with a calm but meaningful voice, "I hope you remember this day." And then she left, leaving behind a jewelry store where silence had become deafening. Ashley remained at the counter for a few seconds, trying to process why she suddenly felt uneasy. There was something about that lady's behavior, an almost regal tranquility that didn't match the image she had built in her mind. Outside, Dolores got into her modest but well-maintained Cadillac and sat for a few moments, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't anger she felt. It was something deeper. It was the pain of recognizing that even after all the advances, even after raising one of the world's most respected men, there were still people who looked at her and saw only limitations. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Michael," she said, when he answered, her voice controlled but loaded with emotion. "We need to talk." On the other end of the line, Michael Jordan, who was in his office reviewing sponsorship contracts, immediately detected something different in his mother's tone. "Mom, what happened?" "I need to tell you about what just happened at Tiffany," said Dolores. "And I believe it's time we made a decision about the ring." Michael closed his eyes, sensing that his quiet afternoon was about to turn into something much more complicated. "I'm on my way," he said. And so, while Ashley Thompson continued her day at the jewelry store, completely unaware of the hurricane she had just unleashed, the machinery of events that would stop the internet began to turn. Juanita Vanoy's ring, that small piece of gold and diamonds that represented both broken promises and the complexity of human love, was about to become the catalyst for one of the most extraordinary stories of justice, dignity, and the power of second chances. But before anything could be resolved, secrets kept for years would need to come to light, revealing truths that not even the Jordan family imagined. Michael Jordan's mansion in Highland Park was enveloped in the same golden late-afternoon atmosphere when Dolores arrived. The autumn leaves danced in the wind, creating a visual symphony that contrasted with the emotional storm approaching. Michael waited for her at the entrance, still wearing the impeccable suit from his business meetings, but his face heavy with concern. "Mom," he said, enveloping her in a protective embrace, "tell me everything." Seated in the private living room, away from areas where receptionists and staff could hear, Dolores recounted every detail of the incident. Michael listened in silence, but Dolores could see the familiar tension line forming along his jaw, the same sign that appeared when he faced particularly provocative opponents on the courts. "Ashley Thompson," murmured Michael, memorizing the name. Tiffany on Michigan Avenue. Michael, said Dolores calmly. I don't want you to do anything rash. This wasn't the first time I've faced prejudice. And it certainly won't be the last. But it should be, he replied, getting up and walking to the window. In 2024, after everything we've conquered, everything we've built, a store clerk can still look at my mother and assume she doesn't have the right to be there. Dolores watched her son, seeing in him both the determined boy she knew and the global icon he had become. But there was something more. A vulnerability he rarely showed to the world. There's something you need to know, she said softly. About the ring. Michael turned, intrigued by her tone. Juanita didn't return it just because she thought it belonged to the family, continued Dolores. She returned it because she was planning to remarry. The silence that followed was dense. Michael had gotten over the divorce years ago, had built a new life. But the news still hit him unexpectedly. Marry whom? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Marcus Williams, the lawyer who helped her during your divorce. Michael closed his eyes, processing the information. Marcus Williams had been more than a lawyer. He had been a confidant, someone Juanita had leaned on during the most difficult moments of their marriage's dissolution. She's happy, Michael, said Dolores gently. And after all these years, I believe she deserves a second chance at love. I know, he said, though there was a hint of melancholy in his voice. It's strange, but I'm happy for her. There's more, continued Dolores. Juanita didn't want to simply return the ring. She wanted to sell it and use the money for something special. Michael approached, curious. She discovered that Ashley Thompson, the employee who humiliated me today, has a 5-year-old daughter with severe autism. The girl needs specialized therapies that insurance doesn't fully cover. The connection began to form in Michael's mind, but he waited for his mother to continue. Juanita researched Ashley after I told her what happened. She discovered the girl is struggling financially, working double shifts to pay for her daughter's therapies. Her prejudice comes from desperation, Michael. She's so overwhelmed that she sees threats where they don't exist. Michael sat slowly, the complexity of the situation unfolding before him. Juanita suggested we use the ring's value to create a therapy fund for Ashley's daughter, anonymously, of course. But I thought there was a better way. Which way? Dolores smiled for the first time since arriving. How about if Ashley knew exactly who she despised today? And how about if she had the opportunity to learn about consequences and forgiveness? At this moment, Michael's phone rang. It was Marcus Williams. Michael, it's Juanita. She would like to speak with you and your mother. There's something important we need to discuss about the ring situation. Put it on speaker, said Michael. Juanita's voice filled the room, loaded with emotion. Michael, first I need to apologize. I should have told you about Marcus much earlier. I didn't want you to find out this way. Axon. Juanita, it's okay, Mom explained. And I'm happy for you. There was a pause, and then Juanita continued. Thank you. That means a lot. But I called because I just discovered something about Ashley Thompson that completely changes the situation. Michael and Dolores exchanged glances. What did you discover? Asked Dolores. Ashley isn't just an employee working to support her daughter with autism, said Juanita slowly. She's the daughter of Barbara Thompson. The name meant nothing to Michael, but Dolores paled. Barbara Thompson, repeated Dolores in a whisper. The nurse who took care of James when he died. Michael stood up abruptly. James Jordan, his father, had died in 1,993 inches. Tragic circumstances that deeply marked the entire family. Barbara Thompson had been one of the hospital nurses who tried to save him. There's more, continued Juanita. Barbara Thompson never emotionally recovered from losing your father. Michael. She blamed herself for not being able to do more. She developed severe depression, lost her job, and never worked as a nurse again. The room was in absolute silence. Ashley grew up hearing her mother talk about the Jordan family as special people she had failed to help. She grew up carrying a guilt that was never hers to carry. Michael sat heavily, the weight of the revelations hitting him in waves. "You're saying that," he began. "I'm saying that Ashley Thompson treated your mother with prejudice today, but she's carrying a 30-year trauma related to your family. Trauma she doesn't even fully understand." Dolores got up and walked to the window, watching the autumn leaves that continued their eternal dance. "Sometimes," she said softly, "God has a very peculiar sense of humor. Or maybe it's poetic justice." "What do you mean?" asked Michael. "I mean that maybe today wasn't about the ring, or about prejudice, or about humiliation. Maybe it was about two women. One who lost her husband, another who grew up in the shadow of her mother's guilt, finally having the chance to meet." Michael looked at his mother with renewed admiration. Even at 82, she continued to see possibilities for healing where others would see only conflict. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "I'm proposing that tomorrow we go back to the jewelry store. But this time, you come with me." Michael smiled slowly. "And what exactly will we do there? First, we'll give Ashley Thompson the education she clearly needs. Then, we'll tell her about her mother and your father, and then—" Dolores paused. "We'll give her the opportunity to understand that the ghosts of the past can sometimes transform into angels of the present." On the other end of the line, Juanita sighed with relief. "So you're going to do this? You're going to try to transform this situation into something positive?" "We are the Jordans," said Michael, determination returning to his voice. "We don't leave anyone behind. Not even people who hurt us." "There's one more thing," said Juanita hesitantly. "Ashley Thompson doesn't know her mother is still alive. Barbara has been in a nursing home for 5 years, with early dementia. Ashley visits every Sunday, but her mother rarely recognizes her." The silence that followed was loaded with deep sadness. "Then we'll do more than educate her," said Dolores. "We'll give her a chance to understand that she's not alone." "And how will we do that?" asked Michael. Dolores smiled, and for the first time since the incident, there was genuine joy in her eyes. "We'll start with the ring, and we'll end with something Ashley Thompson will never forget." As they planned the next day's events, none of them imagined that their actions were about to trigger a sequence of events that would not only transform Ashley Thompson's life, but become one of the most shared stories on the internet, touching hearts around the world, and proving that sometimes the most extraordinary endings begin with the most ordinary moments of human pain. Night fell over Chicago, but in the Jordan mansion, a new hope was being born. The next morning, Ashley Thompson woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach. She had dreamed about the elderly lady from the day before. Not exactly a nightmare, but something unsettling she couldn't define. While preparing coffee and checking messages from Emma's special school, her daughter, she tried to push away the feeling that she had missed something important. The morning routine was always intense. Emma needed special care before school, and Ashley had learned to turn each moment into a small victory. Today, Emma had managed to eat half her cereal without resistance. Significant progress that filled Ashley with hope. "Mommy's going to work now, Princess," said Ashley, kissing her daughter's forehead. Marie, Ashley's mother, had moved nearby after Ashley discovered Emma's autism. She was a strong woman who hid her own pain behind determined smiles and tireless energy. "Dear," said Marie while Ashley prepared to leave, "you seem tense today. Did something happen yesterday at work?" Ashley hesitated. How could she explain to her mother that she had treated a customer with condescension? Marie had raised Ashley with values of respect and dignity, and discovering her daughter's behavior would deeply disappoint her. "Just a difficult day," replied Ashley. "Nothing major." But while driving to the jewelry store, the image of the elderly lady continued to haunt her thoughts. There was something about her posture, the way she had accepted humiliation with grace, that made Ashley question her own actions. At Tiffany, the morning began like any other. Ashley organized her display cases, checked inventory, and prepared for another day of sales. The manager, Mr. Patterson, greeted her briefly, but she noticed he seemed more attentive than usual. Around 11 a.m., the jewelry store doors opened, and Ashley automatically looked up to greet the new customers. What she saw made her freeze. The same elderly lady from yesterday had returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her walked a tall man, elegantly dressed, with a presence that made all conversations in the store cease instantly. There was something familiar about him. The athletic bearing, the natural confidence, the way he carried his shoulders. Ashley felt her heart race when she recognized who it was. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was walking toward her counter, and beside him was the lady she had humiliated the day before. "Oh my God," whispered Ashley, feeling the blood drain from her face. The realization hit her like a tsunami. The ordinary lady she had treated with contempt was Dolores Jordan, Michael Jordan's mother. Whispered conversations began echoing through the store as other employees and customers recognized the icon. Discreet cell phones began appearing, but Michael kept his attention focused on Ashley, who was visibly trembling. "Good morning," said Dolores calmly, approaching the counter. "I believe you remember me." Ashley opened and closed her mouth several times before managing to produce any sound. I, Mrs. Jordan, breathe," said Michael softly, but his voice carried undeniable authority. "We didn't come here to humiliate you." Mr. Patterson approached quickly, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Jordan, it's an honor to have you in our store. How can I?" Michael gently raised his hand. "Thank you, but we would like to speak directly with Miss Thompson." Ashley felt as if the world was spinning around her. Employees, customers, everyone was watching, some discreetly filming. She was at the center of a situation that could destroy her career and reputation in minutes. "Miss Thompson," said Dolores, "yesterday you asked me if I could prove I could afford this store's services." Ashley nodded weakly, unable to speak. "Well," continued Dolores, "today I brought some proof." Michael placed his wallet on the counter and removed his American Express black card. Then, he took out a second wallet and placed several other premium cards next to the first. "My mother," said Michael calmly, "doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. But since you asked the question yesterday, here's your answer." Ashley looked at the cards with growing horror, not because of the display of wealth, but because of understanding how deeply she had been mistaken. "Please," she whispered, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." You didn't know what?" asked Dolores gently. "That I was rich? That my son is famous? Or you didn't know that all people, regardless of their appearance or origin, deserve to be treated with basic dignity?" The question was asked without anger, but with a deep sadness that cut Ashley deeper than any shout could have. Michael leaned slightly over the counter. "Miss Thompson, may I ask why you assumed my mother didn't belong in this place?" Ashley looked around, desperately aware that her answer would be heard by dozens of people. Some were already posting on social media, and she knew this conversation would quickly go viral. I was wrong," she said finally, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Completely wrong. There's no excuse for how I treated her." "You're right," said Michael. "There's no excuse. But perhaps there's a reason." Quote, Ashley looked at him confused. "Tell us about your daughter," said Dolores softly. The sudden change of subject left Ashley even more bewildered. My daughter? Emma, isn't it?" said Michael. 5 years old. Severe autism. Ashley paled even more. "How did they know about Emma? How do you?" "We did our research," said Dolores. "Just like you did yours yesterday, when you decided I didn't have the right to be here." Ashley felt her legs waver. "You investigated my life?" "No," said Michael. "Someone who cares about you did that for us." Before Ashley could ask what that meant, the jewelry store doors opened again, and an elegant, dark-haired woman entered. Ashley recognized her immediately from photos she had seen online. It was Juanita Vanoy, Michael Jordan's ex-wife. Juanita approached the group, carrying a folder of documents. "Miss Thompson," she said, My name is Juanita Vanoy. I believe we need to talk. Ashley was completely lost now. Why was Michael Jordan's ex-wife there? Yesterday, continued Juanita, when I learned how you treated Mrs. Jordan, I was furious. My first instinct was to ensure you lost your job. Ashley closed her eyes, preparing for the inevitable. But then, said Juanita, I started investigating who you really are. And I discovered something interesting. Juanita opened the folder and removed several documents. I discovered that you're the daughter of Barbara Thompson, a nurse who worked at Mercy Hospital in 1993. Ashley frowned, confused about the relevance. I discovered that your mother was on duty the night of the 23rd of July, 1993, when James Jordan, Michael's father, arrived at the hospital after being shot. Ashley's heart stopped. She knew this story, but had never made the connection. I discovered that your mother was one of the nurses who fought desperately to save his life, continued Juanita. And I discovered that she never recovered from the fact that she couldn't succeed. Ashley began trembling uncontrollably. Childhood memories returned in waves, her mother crying in the bathroom, talking about the man she couldn't save, the guilt she carried like an invisible burden. You grew up seeing your mother destroy herself over something that was never her fault, said Dolores softly. And now you're destroying yourself, trying to keep your own daughter safe. I don't understand, whispered Ashley. Why are you telling me this? Michael exchanged glances with his mother and Juanita. Because, he said, it's time for some wounds to finally heal. And then, in the Tiffany jewelry store, in front of dozens of witnesses and cell phone cameras, began a conversation that would transform not only Ashley Thompson's life, but touch the hearts of millions of people around the world. But first, there were more revelations that needed to come to light. Secrets that connected these people in ways none of them had imagined. Ashley Thompson remained silent for long seconds, processing the revelations she had just heard. The jewelry store had transformed into a surreal scene. Customers pretended to examine jewelry while discreetly paying attention to the conversation. Employees circulated nervously, and the atmosphere was charged with an emotional tension that few completely understood. My mother, said Ashley finally, her voice trembling. She never talked about the details of that night. She only said she had failed an important family. Dolores leaned slightly forward, her expression softening. Your mother didn't fail us, dear. She was one of the people who fought hardest to save my husband. But he died, whispered Ashley, tears beginning to roll down her face. Yes, said Michael calmly. He died. But not from lack of care or competence. He died because sometimes, no matter how much we fight, no matter how desperately we try, some battles simply cannot be won. Juanita opened the folder again and removed a set of medical documents. I got copies of the hospital records from that night, she said. With the family's permission, of course. Would you like me to read something to you, Ashley? Ashley nodded, unable to trust her own voice. Nurse Barbara Thompson demonstrated exceptional competence and tireless dedication during the emergency, read Juanita. Her resuscitation efforts were exemplary and executed according to all appropriate medical protocols. The staff recognizes her professional and emotional dedication to the case. Ashley covered her face with her hands, sobbing openly now. There's more, continued Juanita gently. Nurse Thompson remained with the family during the final hours, offering emotional support and professional comfort that was deeply appreciated by the bereaved. Michael approached Ashley, his voice loaded with genuine emotion. Your mother held my mother's hand when my father died. She cried with us. She cared in a way that went far beyond professional duty. Then why did she blame herself so much? Asked Ashley between sobs. Because, said Dolores softly, sometimes people who feel most deeply are the ones who punish themselves most when they can't control the uncontrollable. At this moment, Mr. Patterson approached hesitantly. Miss Thompson, perhaps it would be better if you composed yourself in the private office. We have customers. Michael turned to the manager, and although his voice remained calm, there was an unmistakable authority in it. Mr. Patterson, I suggest you allow this conversation to continue. And I also suggest you instruct your staff to treat all customers, with the same respect you would like to receive. The manager paled and retreated quickly. Ashley, said Juanita, there's something else you need to know about your mother. Ashley looked up, still wiping away tears. After Mr. Jordan's death, your mother wrote a letter to our family. A long letter, explaining how she felt responsible and asking forgiveness for something she had no control over. You received the letter? Yes, said Dolores. And I wrote one back. Ashley frowned. A letter back? I wrote thanking her for the care, compassion, and humanity she demonstrated during the most difficult moment of our lives. I told her I considered it a gift from God to have had people like her caring for my husband in his final moments. I never knew about any letter, said Ashley, confused. Because your mother never received it, said Juanita sadly. We discovered yesterday that the letter was sent to the wrong address. Our mistake. A decades-old error. Ashley felt the world spin around her again. You're saying my mother spent 30 years blaming herself for something you had already forgiven? Not just forgiven, said Michael. Grateful for. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of a cell phone ringing. It was Ashley's phone. It's from Emma's school, she said, checking the display. Answer it, said Dolores gently. Ashley hesitated but answered. The conversation was brief, but her expression changed dramatically. What was it? Asked Juanita. Emma had a crisis at school. She needs to be taken home. And there's an emergency meeting about her therapy program. Insurance won't cover the specialized sessions she needs anymore. Ashley began mentally calculating costs, panic visible on her face. Emma's specialized therapies cost more than $3,000 a month. Money she simply didn't have. Michael and Dolores exchanged meaningful glances. Ashley, said Michael, how much does Emma's complete therapy program cost? Why are you? It's $15,000 per semester, but I'll find a way. I always find a way. What if there was another way? Asked Dolores. Before Ashley could answer, Juanita removed another document from the folder. This, she said, is the deed to a special educational fund established last night. A fund specifically destined for the care and education of children with special needs in Chicago. Ashley looked at the document, confused. The fund was established with an initial donation of $500,000, continued Juanita. And Emma Thompson is its first beneficiary. Ashley paled. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, said Michael firmly. It's justice. It's a debt of gratitude my family has owed yours for 3 decades. But nothing, said Dolores. Ashley, your mother took care of our family when we needed it most. Now it's our turn to take care of yours. Ashley looked at the documents through tears she couldn't control. I don't understand why you're doing this. After what I did yesterday. You want to know why? Asked Michael, sitting in a nearby chair to be at Ashley's eye level. She nodded. Because yesterday, when you asked me if my mother could pay for our services, you weren't talking to me. You were talking to the world that made you believe people like your family don't deserve the same opportunities. Michael paused, carefully choosing his words. You were speaking like someone who carries the weight of a guilt that isn't yours, trying to protect a daughter who needs help you can't provide alone. You were speaking like a daughter who grew up watching her mother destroy herself over a tragedy she couldn't prevent. Ashley sobbed more intensely. And you know what else? Continued Michael. You were speaking like someone who deserves a second chance. Just like your mother deserved forgiveness. Just like all of us deserve an opportunity to be better than our worst moments. There's one condition, said Juanita softly. Ashley looked at her through tears. We want you to read the letter Dolores wrote to your mother 30 years ago. And we want you to deliver it personally. My mother, she's not well. She has dementia and rarely recognizes me. Then you'll read it to her, said Dolores. And maybe, for just a moment, the woman who cared for my family with so much love will finally find the peace she deserved so long ago. Ashley looked at the people around her, the family she had humiliated, who could have destroyed her, but who instead were offering redemption not only to her, but to her mother as well. "I don't know how to thank you." "You thank us," said Michael, standing up, "by being the mother Emma deserves to have. You thank us by treating every person you meet with the dignity you would want your daughter to receive. And you thank us by remembering that we're all fighting battles that others can't see." Ashley nodded fervently. "And one more thing," said Dolores, with an enigmatic smile. "We want you to come with us to the nursing home. Today." "Today?" "Yes," said Juanita. "Because there's one last surprise your mother deserves to receive." Ashley couldn't imagine what it would be. But when she looked into Dolores Jordan's eyes, the eyes of the woman she had humiliated just one day before, she saw something that left her breathless. She saw compassion. She saw forgiveness. And she saw the kind of maternal love that transcends blood, race, and circumstance. But there was still one last revelation waiting. Something that would connect their lives in a way none of them could have predicted. The Sunset Gardens nursing home was located in a quiet Chicago neighborhood, its red brick walls embraced by golden vines that reflected the autumn sunlight. Ashley Thompson had never brought visitors to see her mother. The shame of Barbara's condition, combined with her own financial limitations, made her prefer private Sunday visits. Today was different. A small caravan had formed. Dolores Jordan's Cadillac, Michael's Mercedes, and Juanita Vanoy's BMW. Ashley had left her modest Honda in the jewelry store parking lot and accepted a ride with Dolores, still processing the surreal events of the last few hours. During the journey, Dolores had shared more details about the night James Jordan died, how Barbara had stayed beyond her shift, how she had held her hand during the final moments, how she had genuinely cried for a man she barely knew. "Your mother has a heart that feels others' pain as if it were her own," Dolores had said. "That's not a weakness, Ashley. It's a rare gift." Now, standing in front of the nursing home's main entrance, Ashley felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation she couldn't explain. "Mrs. Thompson," greeted Margaret, the receptionist, when they saw Ashley enter. "What a surprise! It's not Sunday." "Margaret," said Ashley nervously, "I brought some friends to meet my mother. Is that okay?" Margaret looked at the group, 3 clearly important people, elegantly dressed, and nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. Your mother is in the activity room. She had a particularly good morning today." As they walked through the hallways, Ashley explained her mother's condition. "Some days she recognizes me. Others, she thinks I'm a nurse. But she always remembers her time at the hospital. It's one of the few memories that remained intact." The activity room was spacious and sunny, with large windows overlooking a well-maintained garden. Barbara Thompson was sitting near the window, knitting something that looked like a child's scarf, a habit she had developed, creating clothes for a granddaughter she could rarely remember having. At 68, Barbara still maintained traces of the beauty she had possessed in her youth. Her hair, now completely white, was carefully arranged, and she wore a light blue cardigan that Ashley had bought the previous year. "Mom," said Ashley softly, approaching, "I brought some friends to meet you." Barbara looked up and smiled, the vague but sweet smile she offered to most strangers. "How kind," she said with the soft voice Ashley remembered from childhood. "Are you new staff members?" Ashley was about to explain when Dolores stepped forward. "Barbara," she said gently, "my name is Dolores Jordan. I think we met a long time ago." Barbara frowned slightly, as if trying to recover a distant memory. Then, her eyes fixed on Dolores's face, and something changed. "Jordan," she repeated slowly. "That name. I know. That name." Michael approached, and when Barbara saw him, her expression changed dramatically. She dropped her knitting and brought her hands to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. You're his son, James's son." The recognition that had been lacking for Ashley was completely present for the moment that mattered most. "Yes," said Michael softly, kneeling beside Barbara's chair. "I'm Michael, James Jordan's son." Barbara began trembling, tears forming in her eyes. I remember that night. I tried so hard to save him, but I couldn't. I failed." "No," said Dolores firmly, sitting in the chair next to Barbara. "You didn't fail. You were an angel to our family that night." Barbara looked from Dolores to Michael, confusion and pain alternating on her face. "But he died. He died, and I couldn't do anything to stop it." "Barbara," said Dolores, gently taking the younger woman's hands. "May I tell you something I should have said 30 years ago?" Barbara nodded, still trembling. "That night, when my world was falling apart, when I felt I had lost everything that mattered, you were there. You held my hand when I thought I would never be able to breathe again. You cried with me when words weren't enough." Dolores paused, her own voice choked with emotion. "You gave me strength to keep living when I just wanted to give up. You took care of my husband with the tenderness I would have given him if I could have been there. You were God's answer to my prayers." Barbara was sobbing now, decades of guilt finally finding a release valve. "I wrote a letter," said Dolores. "A letter, thanking you for everything you did. But it never reached you." Juanita approached and handed over a yellowed envelope. The original letter, carefully preserved all these years. "Would you like to hear it?" asked Dolores. Barbara nodded, unable to speak. Dolores opened the letter and began to read. "Dear Barbara, I don't know if I'll ever have the right words to express what your presence meant to our family on the darkest night of our lives. As I write this, I can still feel the comfort of your hand in mine. I can still hear your gentle voice assuring me that James wasn't alone. You might think you failed because you couldn't save him. But I know you didn't fail. You gave us the gift of human compassion when we needed it most. You honored my husband's life with your care, your dedication, and your sincere tears. I want you to know that I consider it a privilege to have had someone like you caring for James. I want you to know that your presence transformed a tragedy into a testimony of how love can exist even between strangers." Dolores continued reading, and when she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Barbara was crying openly, but for the first time in decades, they were tears of relief. "I've carried this guilt for so long," whispered Barbara. "So long, and now you can let it go," said Michael. "Because there was never any guilt to carry." Ashley, who had watched the scene with growing amazement, finally found her voice. "Mom, do you remember me?" Barbara looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time in years. The mental clarity that trauma had temporarily restored allowed her to truly recognize her own daughter. "Ashley," she said, extending her arms. "My dear Ashley, you brought the angels to me." Mother and daughter embraced, and Ashley felt as if she was recovering not only her mother, but also a part of herself that had been lost years ago. "There's something more," said Juanita softly. Barbara looked at her, still holding Ashley. "We've established a fund to ensure you receive the best possible care for the rest of your life. Care that will allow you to have more moments of clarity like this one. And," added Michael, "we've ensured that Emma, your granddaughter, receives all the therapy and special education she needs." Barbara looked confused. "Emma? I have a granddaughter?" Ashley smiled through tears. "Yes, Mom. A beautiful 5-year-old granddaughter you'll get to know very soon." "But why?" asked Barbara, looking at each of them. "Because," said Dolores, "some debts of gratitude take 30 years to be paid, and because we believe that families take care of each other, even when those families are formed by circumstances we never could have foreseen." Barbara looked around the room, at the people who had transformed her daughter from stranger to family, and smiled with a peace she hadn't felt in decades. "James would be proud," she said softly. "He would be very proud to see how you honored his memory." Michael leaned down and kissed Barbara's forehead. But while this extraordinary reunion was happening at the nursing home, across town, Something was unfolding that none of them expected. The discreet filming from the jewelry store had already been posted online, and the story was spreading across social media like wildfire. Within hours, the entire world would know about the humiliation, forgiveness, redemption, and reunion that had taken place. And the global response would be beyond anything they could have imagined. While the Jordan family and the Thompsons shared a deeply intimate moment at the nursing home, across the city and around the world, a digital storm was forming. The first video had been posted by a jewelry store customer, initially just a 30-second clip showing Ashley being confronted by Michael Jordan and his mother. The title was sensationalist. Michael Jordan humiliates employee who disrespected his mother. Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed more than 500,000 times. The comments were savage. Thousands of people demanding Ashley be fired, boycotting Tiffany, celebrating what they believed was immediate justice. But then, something extraordinary began to happen. A second footage emerged, longer, showing Michael defending Ashley against the manager who wanted to shut her away in the office. This version captured his words about everyone deserving a second chance. Then a third video appeared, discreetly filmed by a jewelry store employee. This one showed the moment when Juanita revealed information about Barbara Thompson and the connection to James Jordan. Sarah Chen, a freelance journalist specializing in viral stories, was one of the first to realize there was something deeper happening. She had followed the Jordans for years and knew Michael wasn't known for unnecessary public confrontations. "There's something here we're not seeing," she tweeted. Sarah began investigating. Within 4 hours, she had tracked the connection between Barbara Thompson and James Jordan through public hospital records. The story she discovered left her breathless. At 6 p.m., Sarah posted a Twitter thread that would completely change the narrative. Thread: the real story behind today's viral Michael Jordan video. Get ready. This isn't what you think. 1/23. The thread contained everything: Barbara Thompson's story, the guilt she carried for 30 years, Ashley's struggle with her autistic daughter, the lost letter, and the extraordinary act of compassion that had unfolded. Sarah's thread was retweeted 50,000 times in the first hour. Other journalists began confirming the details. Margaret, the nursing home receptionist, spoke with reporters about how angels had visited one of their most beloved residents. Jewelry store employees, initially reluctant, began sharing what they had really witnessed. By 8 p.m., number Jordan compassion was trending worldwide. Social media transformed. Comments that initially celebrated humiliation now expressed admiration. People began sharing their own stories about prejudice, forgiveness, and second chances. A particularly touching post came from Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a pediatrician specializing in autism. As a doctor who works with families like Ashley Thompson's daily, I can say that the financial and emotional stress of raising a child with special needs can make good people make bad decisions. What the Jordan family did today was demonstrate that true greatness lies in seeing beyond the moment to the whole person. The post was liked more than 2 million times. Celebrity after celebrity began sharing the story. LeBron James tweeted, "This is leadership. This is how you honor your father and your family." At Jumpman23, "You inspire me every day," Oprah posted a long reflection about how the most transformative moments happen when we choose compassion instead of revenge. But it was the personal stories that really touched hearts. Thousands of people began sharing their experiences. "My sister has autism. I know how desperation can make you behave in ways that don't represent who you really are. God bless the Jordans." At Sarah Mama, 2015. "I work in a nursing home. I've seen dementia steal so many families. What they did for Barbara Thompson, I'm crying." At Nurse Life, 47. "I'm Black and have been humiliated in expensive stores, but the way they transformed pain into healing, this is spiritual evolution." At Dr. Williams, PhD. As the night progressed, the story reached international media. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Everyone wanted the complete story. Hollywood producers were already calling the agents of those involved. But perhaps the most touching were the responses from parents of children with special needs. An organic movement began with the hashtag number #EmmaStrong, people sharing photos of their own special children and stories of perseverance. A father in Phoenix posted, "My son has severe autism. Some days I feel so overwhelmed I can barely breathe." Seeing how the Jordans saw beyond Ashley's pain to her humanity gives me hope. A mother in London wrote, "I've misjudged people who were fighting battles I couldn't see. This story reminded me to be kinder. We're all fighting something." By the end of the night, the GoFundMe page someone had created for families like Ashley had raised over $100,000 in spontaneous donations. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source: Tiffany & Co. itself. In an official statement posted at 11 p.m., the company announced, "After today's events at our Michigan Avenue store, we would like to clarify that the Jordans and Thompsons demonstrated the kind of grace and humanity we aspire to embody as a company. Ashley Thompson will remain on our team, and we will immediately implement new training programs focused on inclusion and empathy. Additionally, we have established a $500,000 fund to support employees facing family difficulties, because we believe people going through hard times deserve support, not judgment." But while the world celebrated the story, at the nursing home, something even more extraordinary was happening. Barbara Thompson was having her day of greatest mental clarity in 5 years. The emotional release of finally receiving forgiveness for a guilt she had carried for decades had unlocked memories and connections doctors thought were lost forever. "I want to meet Emma," she said to Ashley as they prepared to leave. "I want to meet my granddaughter and tell her about her grandmother who took care of Angels." Ashley cried again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. Michael, who had remained in the background during most of the visit, approached. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "may I ask you a question?" Barbara smiled. "How did you manage to maintain so much compassion after carrying so much pain for so long?" Barbara thought for a moment. "Because," she said finally, "I learned that shared pain becomes lighter, but stored pain becomes heavier. And I learned that sometimes God uses our darkest moments to prepare our hearts for His brightest miracles." Michael nodded, understanding he had learned something profound not only about forgiveness, but about the nature of human redemption. But as this improvised family prepared to leave the nursing home, none of them knew the story was just beginning to unfold in ways that would change not only their lives, but inspire real changes in the world. 1 week after the events at the jewelry store, everyone involved had had their lives transformed in unimaginable ways. The Sunset Gardens nursing home had become an informal pilgrimage destination, with people from across the country sending letters and gifts to Barbara Thompson. Ashley had been promoted to assistant manager at Tiffany after demonstrating a level of customer service and empathy that inspired the entire team. But it was Thursday night, exactly 7 days after the initial confrontation, that the most extraordinary event was about to happen. Michael had planned something special, a private dinner at his mansion, bringing together all the protagonists of this unlikely story. Not just Ashley and Barbara Thompson, but also Juanita, Michael's children, some Tiffany employees who had become friends, and a special guest no one expected. The table was elegantly set in the main dining room, overlooking the garden where the first winter lights created a magical atmosphere. Barbara had had an exceptional week of mental clarity. Doctors attributed this to the emotional relief and renewed sense of purpose she had found. Emma Thompson was present for the first time. A delicate 5-year-old girl whose bright eyes captured every detail around her. She had instantly connected with Barbara, who knitted while telling stories in a low voice. "Grandma," said Emma in her soft voice, "tell me again about the Angels." Barbara smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "Angels, my dear, sometimes disguise themselves as ordinary people doing extraordinary things." Ashley watched the interaction with tears in her eyes. Her daughter, who rarely responded to most people, had been completely enchanted by the grandmother she barely knew. "She's flourishing," commented Dr. Sarah Kim, Emma's new therapist, who had volunteered to accompany the family this special night. "The stable and loving environment is creating neural connections I thought might take years to develop." Michael stood up to make a toast, but before he could speak, the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting anyone else?" asked Ashley. Michael smiled mysteriously. When he returned, he was accompanied by an elderly woman, elegantly dressed. Wearing a silk scarf, Ashley recognized immediately. It was the customer from the jewelry store. The same lady who had witnessed the entire initial confrontation a week before. "I'd like to introduce you to," said Michael, "Mrs. Eleanor Richardson." Ashley frowned, confused about why this specific customer was present. Eleanor smiled warmly. "Actually, dear, I'm not just a random customer. I'm a board member of the Richardson Foundation for Special Needs." Ashley still looked lost. "And," continued Eleanor, "after witnessing last week's events, our foundation decided to do something unprecedented." She opened an elegant folder and removed several documents. "We've established a permanent $5 million fund specifically to support families in Chicago facing challenges similar to Emma's. But that's not all." Eleanor turned to Barbara. "Mrs. Thompson, your story deeply touched our foundation's heart. We've decided to create the Barbara Thompson Program, an initiative that will offer free psychological support to healthcare professionals facing work-related trauma." Quote. Barbara covered her mouth with her hands, too emotional to speak. "And Ashley," continued Eleanor, "we'd like you to consider becoming our spokesperson. Your journey from a desperate mother to a compassion advocate is exactly the kind of story that can inspire real change." Ashley looked around the table, seeing the faces of people who a week before were complete strangers and now felt like family. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," encouraged Juanita. "Say yes to being the voice for mothers like you who are fighting alone." "There's one more thing," said Michael, standing up again. "A final surprise," he signaled to someone in the kitchen, and Marcus Williams, Juanita's fiancé, entered carrying a small but elegant box. "Juanita and I," said Marcus, "decided that our wedding ceremony wouldn't be complete without honoring the people who taught us about the true meaning of love and forgiveness." Juanita stood up, radiant. "We'd like you to be our honor family. Barbara, Ashley, Emma. We want you present when Marcus and I exchange vows." "But there's more," said Marcus, opening the box. Inside was a ring. Not the original ring that had caused this entire journey, but a new one, specially designed. "This ring," explained Juanita, "was made with gold that included a small fragment from the original ring. It carries the story of first loves, second chances, forgiveness, and the extraordinary capacity of the human heart to heal." Barbara finally managed to speak. "You're saying you want an old retired nurse and her family at your wedding?" "We don't just want," said Michael firmly. "We need. Because this week taught me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by people who choose to love, forgive, and grow together." Emma, who had been quiet during most of the conversation, suddenly spoke with uncommon clarity. "Mommy, are we a family now?" Ashley looked around the table, at Barbara, whose decades of guilt had finally been healed. At Michael, who had transformed humiliation into compassion. At Juanita, who chose growth instead of revenge. At Eleanor, who transformed testimony into action. At Emma, who was flourishing in an environment of unconditional love. "Yes, my love," said Ashley, her voice choked with emotion. "We are a family." Michael raised his glass. "A toast," he said, "to Barbara Thompson, who taught us that caring for strangers is the purest form of prayer. To Ashley, who showed us that recognizing our mistakes is the first step to redemption. To Emma, who reminds us that love doesn't require perfect words, just open hearts. To family," said Dolores, her voice strong and clear, in all its unexpected forms. To family, everyone echoed. As they toasted, no one noticed that Eleanor had discreetly photographed the moment. The next morning, this image of a table, surrounded by people of different races, ages, and backgrounds, united by compassion and purpose, would become one of the most shared photos of the year. The caption Eleanor posted was simple. Sometimes miracles begin with someone simply choosing to be kind. But while this improvised family celebrated their new bond, across town, something was still unfolding that would make their story even more extraordinary. The Ashley effect, as sociologists began calling it, was creating waves of change that extended far beyond a Chicago jewelry store, and the true magnitude of what they had begun was just starting to be revealed. 6 months later, on a sunny spring morning, Ashley Thompson stood on the stage of the McCormick Convention Center, looking at an audience of more than 5,000 people. The National Symposium on Compassion and Second Chances had grown beyond all expectations, attracting educators, healthcare professionals, business leaders, and families from across the country. But for Ashley, the most important moment wasn't on stage. It was in the front row, where Emma, now 6 years old and flourishing in her therapy program, was sitting next to Barbara, who had become not only a present grandmother, but a vocal advocate for the rights of elderly people with dementia. 6 months ago, began Ashley, her voice clear and confident in a way she never imagined possible. I was a desperate mother who allowed fear and stress to transform me into someone I didn't recognize. Today, I'm here to tell you that redemption is always possible, but only when we find people willing to see our humanity through our mistakes. The audience was in complete silence, absorbing every word. The Jordan family could have destroyed me. They had the power, the influence, and frankly, the justification to do so. Instead, they chose to see me, not as my worst action, but as my unrealized potential. Backstage, Michael Jordan watched through a monitor, smiling with paternal pride. Next to him, Juanita, now Juanita Williams for 4 months, held Marcus's hand as they watched Ashley's transformation. She found her voice, murmured Juanita. No, corrected Michael. She always had that voice. We just helped her remember how to use it. On stage, Ashley continued. But this isn't just my story. It's the story of Mrs. Barbara Thompson, my mother, who carried unnecessary guilt for 3 decades because no one remembered to tell her she had been an angel in one of another family's darkest moments. The camera focused on Barbara in the front row. At 69, she looked years younger, her eyes bright with renewed purpose. In recent months, she had become a sought-after speaker on overcoming trauma and forgiveness. It's the story of Emma, my daughter, continued Ashley, who teaches me every day that love doesn't need to be spoken to be felt, and that sometimes the greatest victories are the smallest progress. Emma waved to her mother on stage, a gesture she had recently learned and used with increasing frequency. But above all, said Ashley, her voice filling with emotion, it's the story of how choosing compassion instead of revenge can create waves of change that extend far beyond what we can see. She paused, looking at the audience. What you may not know is that our story inspired more than 200 similar programs in companies across the country. Programs that recognize that employees going through personal difficulties need support, not punishment. The audience applauded, but Ashley raised her hand to continue. It inspired changes in nursing home policies that now include forgiveness therapy as part of standard care for residents with depression and anxiety. It inspired the creation of 47 local funds for families with special children. The applause grew more intense, and it inspired something we never could have imagined, a global radical kindness movement that has already touched more than 1 million lives. In the front row, Eleanor Richardson, now a dear friend of the Thompson family, discreetly wiped away a tear. As director of the Richardson Foundation, she had witnessed firsthand how Ashley's story had inspired unprecedented donations and volunteerism. But perhaps the deepest impact, continued Ashley, is the most personal. Michael Jordan didn't just teach me about forgiveness. He taught me that true leadership means elevating others, especially when they need it most. Backstage, Michael closed his eyes, remembering his father and how James Jordan always said that the true measure of a man wasn't what he achieved, but how he helped others achieve. Dolores Jordan didn't just teach me about grace. She taught me that being a matriarch means protecting not just your own family, but the broader human family. Ashley looked directly at where Dolores was sitting in the second row, elegant as always at 83, but now with a deep satisfaction that came from seeing how her decision to forgive had created waves of healing. And Barbara Thompson, my mother, taught me that sometimes we carry guilts that aren't ours to carry, and that allowing others to help us release them isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Barbara stood up and waved to her daughter, receiving a standing ovation from the audience. But the most touching moment was yet to come. "There's someone I want to introduce to you," said Ashley. "Someone who transformed this story from personal confrontation into global movement." The lights dimmed, and a video began playing on the giant screen. It was a montage of thousands of small acts of kindness, inspired by the Jordans and Thompsons' story. People helping strangers, companies changing policies, families reconciling, communities coming together. When the lights returned, a familiar figure was walking toward the stage. It was a young woman about 20 years old, moving with the help of crutches, but with a radiant smile that illuminated the entire auditorium. "This is Katie Morrison," said Ashley. "Katie has cerebral palsy and was inspired by our story to create the Compassion Connect app, a platform that connects people going through difficulties with resources and support in their local communities." Katie approached the microphone with determination. "When I saw the story of Mrs. Thompson and the Jordan family," said Katie with a clear voice despite her speech difficulty, "I realized we're all just one crisis away from misjudging someone or being misjudged." The app has already connected more than 100,000 people who needed help with people willing to help. The ovation was deafening. Ashley took back the microphone. "Katie reminds me that our story isn't special because it involves a celebrity. It's special because it proves that any of us can choose to be the catalyst for healing in another person's life." She made a final pause, looking around the packed auditorium. 6 months ago, I was in a jewelry store, letting my fears and prejudices speak for me. Today, I'm here because a family chose to see my humanity through my mistake. Not because I deserved it, but because compassion isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. Ashley took a deep breath. "So my challenge to each of you is simple. When you encounter someone on their worst day, remember it might be God's opportunity to use you as an instrument of His grace. And when you're on your own worst day, remember there's always someone willing to see your best. You just need to be brave enough to accept that help." When Ashley finished, there was no immediate applause. There was silence. The kind of sacred silence that happens when people know they've witnessed something that will forever change how they see the world. Then, slowly, Emma stood up in the front row and began clapping. Barbara joined her. Then Eleanor. Then the entire front row. Then the whole auditorium. But the most touching moment came when Michael Jordan joined Ashley on stage. Without words, he embraced her. Not as a celebrity embracing a fan, but as a father embracing a daughter. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear, "for reminding me why my father would be proud." That night, when Ashley returned home, now a larger house that could comfortably accommodate Emma and Barbara, she found a letter waiting on the kitchen table. It was from a young mother in Japan who had watched the symposium live stream. The letter, carefully translated into English, said, "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I am the mother of a child with autism in Tokyo. Yesterday, a store clerk was rude to me when my daughter had a meltdown. My first instinct was to be furious. Then, I remembered your story. Instead, I invited the clerk for coffee and told her about the challenges I face. She cried and told me her own sister has special needs. Now we are friends. Your story traveled around the world and changed how a stranger in Japan responded to a difficult moment. That's the power of compassion. With eternal gratitude, Yuki Tanaka. Ashley carefully folded the letter and placed it in a special box where she kept hundreds of similar stories she had received from around the world. That night, when she put Emma to bed, her daughter said something that left her breathless. "Mommy," said Emma clearly, "you turned our sadness into other people's joy." Ashley kissed her daughter's forehead, knowing Emma had understood, in her special wisdom, exactly what had happened to their family. And as Ashley prepared for sleep, she reflected on how a simple wedding ring, a symbol of broken promises, had become the catalyst for an extended family that now stretched across continents. The original ring was now in a place of honor in Michael Jordan's house, not as a symbol of ending, but as a reminder that all endings can become new beginnings if we have enough courage to choose love instead of fear. And in homes around the world, people who would never meet personally continued to be touched by the story of how a humiliated jewelry store clerk and a family who chose to forgive changed the definition of family forever. What had begun as a small interaction in a Chicago jewelry store had become a global movement, proving that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And this revolution of compassion was just beginning. The story of Michael Jordan's ring that stopped the internet became more than viral. It became timeless, reminding us that in a world where we can choose between judgment and compassion, the choice we make defines not only the character of our own lives, but the legacy we leave for future generations. Ashley Thompson, Barbara Thompson, Michael Jordan, Dolores Jordan, Juanita Williams, Eleanor Richardson, and little Emma proved that family isn't defined by blood, but by people who choose to grow together through forgiveness, understanding, and unconditional love. And somewhere in Chicago, in a jewelry store where it all began, a small plaque now reminds all visitors: treat every person as if they were someone you love, because maybe they are.